A new poll out this morning, by the way, says that people believe that immigration is the biggest issue in this country and that Britain is broken. Very much the saga that we've been saying for many, many months and years. Very much the saga that Richard, you and Reform have been saying as well. Very good morning.
Absolutely, very good morning to you. And the results last Thursday night reinforce that poll, because what we were hearing on the doors and on the streets up and down the country was that actually people were raging, literally raging with fury about uncontrolled legal and illegal immigration, and that by far and away trumped issues around potholes, around bins and the like. And yeah, so we had a
Reform UK just delivered a knockout punch to both Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and Keir Starmer isn't hiding his frustration. Why? Because Nigel Farage and Richard Tice have turned the tables, challenging the left with their own rhetoric. For years, Labour and the Lib Dems have championed open-door immigration policies, presenting themselves as the moral compass of the nation. Now, Reform UK is calling their bluff. Richard Tice's message was sharp and simple. You welcome them, then house them.
surrender, frankly, on the three big critical issues. Looks like they're going to surrender on reintroducing freedom of movement, that they rebadge youth mobility. That all sounds very nice and cuddly. But in reality, if it's 18 to 30 or 35-year-olds, that was the bulk of the freedom of movement that the British people voted against in 2016, and then just a few weeks ago expressed a clear view against mass immigration by voting in huge numbers for Reform UK. Last week, the Prime Minister said he heard and he was going to reduce immigration. Not if you surrender to more freedom of movement. The second big surrender is on becoming a rule taker under what they call dynamic alignment, that we would have to accept all of the EU regulations. We don't want that. We actually want to reduce the regulation.
In a hard-hitting media appearance, Tice unveiled a bold new plan to push back on illegal immigration. This isn't just posturing. Reform UK now plans to block the use of council-controlled housing for migrants in areas where they hold power. But they're going one step further, proposing that asylum seekers be redirected into Liberal Democrat and Green-controlled boroughs. If these parties are so proud of their pro-immigration stance, Reform argues, they should bear the logistical responsibility too. The shift isn't symbolic, it's tactical, targeted. And starting in Lincolnshire, where Reform now has control, legal teams have already been mobilised to begin evicting migrants from hotels.
And when asked where they'd go next, Tice's answer was blunt. Send them to the very places that campaigned for open borders.
But it seems that Keir Starmer is just happy to sacrifice that on the altar of trying to cosy up to the bungling bureaucrats in Brussels.
What is his intention?
Tice didn't mince words. He called out Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens as champions of borderless policies who now flinch when asked to live with the results. His message cut through the usual noise. These parties have spent years waving the flag for unlimited immigration, but when it comes time to share the burden, they vanish behind polished statements and political spin. With a smirk, Tice made it clear, this is no PR stunt, it's a deliberate policy shift. He's taking cues from US politics, drawing clear parallels to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who made headlines by transporting migrants directly into Democrat-led cities. That strategy forced local leaders to confront the human cost of policies they once cheered from a distance. Reform UK is applying the same pressure on Britain's left. Their message? You can't preach without participating. And Labour's response so far? Silence. Not a counter-police, not a press release, just unease. For once, it's not about campaign slogans or trying to please every voter. It's about action, and it's catching Labour off guard. As Tice doubles down, Labour stumbles. And Reform, they're just getting started. Reform UK...
Surrender by the UK is taking place as we speak. And at every level, it sounds like a disaster.
Yeah.
My constituents of Boston and Skegness, my fishermen in Boston will be absolutely spitting mad on the news that it appears that Starmer, in the face of a request from the EU to extend the deal for 4 years, he said, no, that's fine, have 12, why not? Take 12.
Well, I'm even
what's 8 years a month?
UK has drawn a hard line and it's working. While Starmer dodges tough questions, Reform charges forward with blunt, unapologetic messaging. They've tapped into deep frustration in working-class towns, where asylum seekers are quietly relocated and local voices ignored, instead of quietly accepting migrant placements. Reform is pushing back, targeting boroughs that champion open borders and calling for accountability. Richard Tice is suing the Home Office to block migrant housing in Reform-led councils and proposing radical shifts, scrapping the Human Rights Act, leaving the ECHR, deporting illegal entrants, and ending four-star hotel stay. Tice's challenge to the Conservatives is equally brutal. 14 years of border failures. Voters are tired of empty promises. Reform positions itself not as another right-wing echo, but as a clean break. And voters are listening. Farage remains the strategist behind the scenes, orchestrating pressure campaigns and planning a broader realignment. This isn't noise, it's a political revolt. Polls are shifting, defections are rumoured. Even alliances with Tory figures like Jacob Rees-Mogg are being floated. Reform is now confronting cultural taboos too. Tice highlighted a case of a police officer investigated for owning wrong political books. Labour and the Lib Dems stayed silent, further proving Reform's claim that free speech is under threat. And while Starmer avoids calls for a national grooming gang inquiry, Reform is demanding one, forcing uncomfortable truths into the spotlight. This isn't just a policy dispute, it's a war over who gets to shape the future. Reform isn't backing down. Reform...
These negotiators that this government have got appear to be the worst negotiators in the history of negotiating.
Well, the truth is that, of course, these are the people that they wanted to remain in the EU. They wanted another referendum. Starmer, of course, wants more freedom of movement, and that's the other big sort of surrender that may or may not be announced today, or it'll be announced a few days down the track, because it may be too difficult to announce that today. But this new word, youth mobility scheme, sounds jolly nice until you realise it's probably aged up to 30 or 35. And it's essentially freedom of movement through the back door, because let's remember the vast majority of EU citizens, East Europeans that came to the UK were, guess what, under the age of 35.
Yeah.
So, and you know, Reform just won by a landslide the local elections a couple of weeks ago, actually, which was all about stopping mass immigration, stopping illegal immigration. And Starmer's just basically flicking the V sign up and saying, we don't care, la la, we're putting our fingers in our ears, and we're just carrying on. I think the British people will be very angry indeed. And then the other big thing, of course, that appears to be given up is, instead of persuading the EU as to the merits of what they call mutual recognition of standards and rules, because both of us have high standards on things like food and goods, it looks like we're caving in and we're accepting EU rules on everything. So we become a rule taker, we give up even more sovereignty. Oh, and that means, guess what? Yes, we become subject to the European Court of Justice, which is one of the reasons for Brexit, was to leave.
Yeah.
Isn't afraid to dig into it. They're forcing the issue, demanding justice in areas like Derbyshire, Staffordshire and Northamptonshire, where they now hold power. While Labour hedges and hesitates, Reform is taking action. For many voters, that contrast is impossible to ignore, and it's why, week by week, the momentum keeps shifting. Starmer may have hoped 2024 would crown him as the next Prime Minister, but now he's facing a brutal political reality. His own party is starting to fracture from within the immigration. And after spending years defending open border policies and criticising anyone who questioned them, Starmer has suddenly pivoted. In a recent speech, he called for stricter visa rules, reduced legal migration, and mandatory English language requirements for dependents. It was a complete reversal, and it didn't go unnoticed. Inside Labour, frustration is boiling over. MPs who built their careers promoting liberal immigration policies are now expected to fall in line behind a platform that sounds eerily like Nigel Farage's.
So Keir Starmer has promised the largest house-building programme since the post-war era, with dozens of new towns built by British workers.
Now, more than 100 possible locations have been suggested for these towns across England, each with the potential for 10,000 or more homes. Starmer has vowed to take on the NIMBYs and the blockers. Good luck with that.
Well, the Prime Minister says he's inspired by King Charles and his overseeing of homes in the new sustainable town in Cornwall.
Well,
Angela Rayner, Yvette Cooper, David Lammy, they've all proudly defended mass immigration for years. Now they're watching their leader echo the very rhetoric they once condemned. It's not just awkward, it's politically dangerous. Behind the scenes, that discomfort is turning into open dissent. One Labour MP even went so far as to compare Starmer's speech to that of Enoch Powell, a name long associated with the hard right. And this criticism didn't come from the opposition, it came from within his own party. It's a sign of how deep the cracks are getting. This isn't just ideological tension, it's identity crisis. Starmer isn't shifting policy because of some newfound conviction. He's doing it because he's scared. Scared of Reform UK's rise. Scared of losing touch with working class voters. And scared that the party he thought he had under control is slipping out of his hands. He didn't make this turn from strength, he made it under pressure. And that pressure is building fast. Instead of leading with clarity, Starmer delivered a nervous, confused speech. He was asked 3 times if he'd commit to reducing immigration below 500,000 a year, and he dodged the question every time. It didn't sound like leadership, it sounded like damage control, and, for a growing number of voters and Labour MPs, it just confirmed what they already feared. To many watching, it's become painfully obvious Starmer's trying to
The UK wants to scrap net stupid zero overall, but as part of that, we're saying that these huge subsidies, we've got to reclaim those, so we'd put a windfall tax on all renewable energy generated by wind farms, by solar farms, by Drax power station. No one wants more ugly pylons on our countryside blighting our environments, so we've got to force National Grid to put the cables on the pylons that are proposed, put those underground. It's actually as economic, and so we will, when we win the next general election, which is the plan, we will force National Grid to put the cables underground, not install them above ground.
He reforms policies without admitting it. He's not leading on immigration, he's reacting, chasing the conversation instead of setting it. But the public can see through it. This is the same man who once called tough border policies racist, who demanded voting rights for EU nationals and campaigned to restore freedom of movement. He even signed letters opposing the deportation of Jamaican nationals convicted of violent crimes. Now he expects voters to believe he's done a complete 180, and it's not working. Voters remember, so do his colleagues, and the media may try to spin it as pragmatism, but within Labour it feels like betrayal. Those who built their careers defending open border policies now find themselves cornered, expected to either fall in line or contradict everything they've stood for. David Lammy, Yvette Cooper, Jess Phillips, where do they stand now? Do they still believe what they've preached for years? Or are they adjusting to stay afloat? That silence is growing louder. And the front bench? It's starting to look like a row of politicians holding their breath, waiting for someone else to blink first. And then came the moment that perfectly exposed the gap between Starmer's words and reality. As he delivered his big, tough on immigration speech, breaking news rolled in. Over 600 illegal migrants had just crossed into the UK. That very day, while he was talking about tightening borders, those borders were wide open. Even Yvette Cooper had to admit that their proposed changes would barely make a dent, reducing arrivals by just 50,000, while annual numbers still exceed 1 million. It's not a solution, it's not even a plan, it's political theatre. The public knows it, reform supporters certainly do, and inside Labour, the discomfort is turning into open frustration. Starmer's shift hasn't unified the party. It's exposed just how fractured it already is. It isn't just a policy failure, it's a leadership crisis. And now, reform isn't on the fringes anymore. They're driving the national conversation, they're shaping the agenda, they're taking risks while others hide behind press statements and doublespeak. Labour thought it could coast into power. Instead, it's now facing a revolt. From voters from within its own ranks, and from a party that's no longer willing to be ignored. He was asked 3 times if he'd commit to reducing immigration below 500,000 a year, and he dodged the question every time. It didn't sound like leadership, it sounded like damage control, and, for a growing number of voters and Labour MPs, It just confirmed what they already feared. To many watching, it's become painfully obvious Starmer's trying to reform. UK didn't just start a debate, they lit the match. And the fire is spreading. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like and subscribe to the channel for more updates like this.